Hello, and welcome back to Bible Book Club. I'm Karen, and today we're talking about the Book of Ruth in the Old Testament. The time frame of this book is, it says right in the first verse, it says, in the days when the judges ruled. So this had happened during the time of the judges, and we've just completed reading and studying that book. And we know it was a very problematic time for the Israelites where they did whatever they wanted to. They didn't have a king who was directing them, and every once in a while, God would send a deliverer when they would cry out to Him, and that deliverer would lead them into victory. I wouldn't say necessarily that they led them back to God, but some of the leaders were godly, but most of them were questionable whether they were godly. So it was in this tumultuous time that no, no, Naomi and her husband Elimelech left home because of a famine. There was no food to be had, and they went to Moab. And so the story is really a story of Naomi, and it was a very tragic story, but then there's a happy ending to it. So it's the story of Naomi, but the name of the book comes from Ruth, who is the real heroine of the story. She's the one that demonstrates loyalty and godly character and really saves the day for her mother in law, Naomi. So the outline of the story is we start out in verses 1 through 5 of the first chapter, our Naomi's tragic story, how she got married and moved to Moab in order to find food, and lost her husband and later lost both her sons. And so verses 6 through 22 of the first chapter talk about Naomi's return to Bethlehem with her daughter-in-law Ruth. Chapter 2 is where Ruth gathers grain in the field of Boaz, who is Naomi's close relative. Chapter 3 is Naomi's instructions to Ruth on how to appeal to Boaz as their kinsman redeemer. And chapter 4 is how Boaz redeems Naomi's land and marries Ruth. And then Ruth has a son who becomes the ancestor of King David. It's a very short book. It's only 4 chapters, but very interesting, very intriguing story. So here's some of my observations from the book of Ruth. First of all, the country that Ruth and the other sister-in-law are from is Moab. That's the country that Naomi and Elimelech have gone to, the country of Moab. And Moab, the father of the Moabite people, was a son of Lot. We remember Abraham and his nephew Lot traveled away from home, and Lot chose to live in Sodom. And when Lot escaped from Sodom with his 2 daughters, and his wife turned back and turned into a pillar of salt, his 2 daughters went with him, and it says they lived up in the hills in the caves. And the daughters became concerned because they lived a very secluded life. They became concerned that they would never find husbands and wouldn't be able to carry on the family name. So they got their father drunk, and that's how they had their children, is that they got him drunk, and then they got impregnated by him. And each of them had a son, and Moab was one of those sons. The famine that caused Naomi and Elimelech to leave the country, we don't know what caused that famine, but I think it's a pretty good chance it was one of a couple of things, either a natural disaster that caused the fields not to produce, or it could have been the military, um, let's see, just the ravages of war, military ravages of war, where the other nations were coming in and they were just taking over the land and ravaging the land. And both of these things were a result of the nation's disobedience. God had told them through Moses and through Joshua that if they were obedient, that God would bless them. If they were disobedient, they would experience these troubles. And so, as a direct result of their disobedience, there was famine and there was also the ravages of war that they suffered. The route that Naomi and Elimelech took to get to Moab is not we're not really sure what route they might have taken. Um, there are three different suggestions that are most likely. One would be that if you look at the map, Bethlehem, where they came from, is here, and then there's the Dead Sea, and then Moab's down here, and so they wouldn't have been able to go like a straight line from Bethlehem to the country of Moab. So they would have either had to go north around the Dead Sea, go down to the south and take the most narrow part, crossing the Red Sea and the most narrow part, or going all the way down around the bottom of the Red Sea, or the Dead Sea, I'm sorry, the Dead Sea. And the information I found online said that this was anywhere from 62 to 102 miles. I believe the northern route was the shortest route. And it would have taken 4 days to a week to travel that. So it wasn't just get up and move and a couple of days later you're in another place. It was quite a journey for them. According to the way the story is told in the first 5 verses here, it seems very possible that Elimelech died shortly after they arrived in Moab. And then it says that they lived there a total of 10 years, or it says after they had lived there 10 years that Naomi decided to come back. And I would assume that her sons probably died closer to the time that she decided to leave, but somewhere in the, or anywhere in the middle, but at some point she heard that there was bread back in Bethlehem, that the food was again producing, and so she decided to go back. There's some real cultural implications in this story. We find that Ruth is a Moabitess. She's from a different culture that doesn't believe in God, but she embraced the culture of Naomi, and the whole practice of kinsman redeemer that's talked about in this story is something that would probably have been foreign to her. It's the idea that if a woman dies without children, then her kinsman, her closest of kin, would redeem her. In other words, he would purchase the property that widow owned, and he would become a husband to her, so that her family line would also be able to carry on the family name. So this was something that was probably foreign to Ruth, but she learned about it from her mother-in-law, and she embraced it. She also embraced the Jewish religion and Israel's God. Another thing that's important to note is how Boaz welcomed foreigners, and he welcomed Ruth without hesitation when she came into his field, and he not only welcomed her, but he made sure that she was protected while she was there, and that she was able to glean as much as possible from his field. And he took notice of her. He welcomed her as a foreigner. And I think this is probably a reflection of the people of Israel, because there's a common concept that because God told them to go and destroy their enemies, people sometimes accuse them of being genocidal or whatever, that they were out to kill all of everybody who wasn't the same as them. But the truth here is we see that Boaz welcomed a foreigner, not based on the family lines or the ancestry, but he welcomed her based on her godly character. And one last thing I noted was that it seems pretty likely that Boaz was already contemplating taking Ruth as his wife or redeeming her, because when Ruth did approach him and say, "You're our kinsman redeemer, would you please redeem our family?" he already had in mind, he already knew that there was somebody who was a closer kin to them than to Naomi than he was. And he did the godly thing, he did the right thing by giving this other man first opportunity, as was the law. And he didn't try to skirt that issue, but he addressed it immediately. And when that man abdicated his right to redeem that property, um, Boaz did as he said he would do, and he took Ruth to be his wife, and he redeemed the property of Naomi's husband Elimelech. And so, it seems like it's pretty probable that in this story, even though they were doing what the law said that they should do, I think that there was probably a real love story here, where there was an affection on Boaz's side and a gratitude on Ruth's side. Thank you for joining us for Bible Book Club. We'll see you next time.